So today we're gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna actually jump into Figma and we're gonna do something that I wanna potentially start called coffee and components, because I'm drinking coffee and we're gonna make some components. But basically the inspiration behind this video is I saw this tweet by Joey Banks. He is a designer at Twitter, or product designer at Twitter, who does a lot of work on design systems. So if you ever are curious about design systems, I highly suggest you go follow him on his Twitter page. He has a lot of great material and information there. But I saw this tweet, basically like, when you're building components, thinking about the pros and like the cons between having a base component versus just really heavily going into using variants is the best way I can explain it. This is what the tweet said, and I think I want to that's the goal here right now, or what I'm wanting to do is explore that a little more here, and just kind of understand, why one may be better than the other, and then also just have fun making stuff. So we're just gonna jump right into it. Okay, so as you can see, this is a very, very blank canvas, coffee and components. I'm gonna read the tweet that I showed, and then just kind of reemphasizes or showed again. So basically Joey's talking about one change I've made when it comes to building components in Figma design has been to not rely on base components as often, especially when working with variants. Adding only the relevant layers means less complexity and less probability of a variant option layer match. And like, that's really, really interesting, because recently I had come across a situation where I started really exploring base components and trying to understand like what they're good for and why. And then I realized, oh, this is really interesting because it definitely will impact the usability of how people are going to use these components. And one of the things that always comes across my mind is when we're creating components and when you're, editing and doing these things for design system things, thinking about the design system as a product in and of itself, and that like components are basically, the features of the product that people are going to use and interact with. And, there's always things changing, adjusting, and depending on like who your users are and like how they interact with them. Because my experience has really been working specifically with variants more so, and not really using base components. So I just kind of like want to dive deep into, like, not dive too deep, maybe like a 10-foot pool deep perhaps, and again see the differences in what that means. So we're going to start with the most basic component that I could think of, is like a button, right? So here we have a button. Let me zoom in so we can see. And I'm going to, so also please be patient with me because I am using a Windows device and I haven't done that in a while. Alright, so this is like a really great example of like a base component. This is the most basic of that. And then there's different ways we could go about this. You could make almost like a variant of the base component, or we're just going to use feather icons because I'm not going to be here making my icons from scratch. It's a common, but like add. Right, okay, plus. Plus is that, and we're just going to make this plus a what do you call that? Component. And then take this and we're gonna put this here. I'm gonna make it smaller. And then we're just gonna make this like this. Okay, so this is probably like a really great, this is probably like the best example I feel of like a full base component, in that this button can take on you know, text, it can also have icons on the left side or the right side, just depending. And so you would go into here and then you would like hide it or not hide it depending on your situation. Let's actually make this different. And we're gonna make another component. Okay, I think this is a better representation of like how that would act. So if you had a button, you know, you would probably have a plus on the left side, or you weren't a chevron on the right. Okay, that's that. There's also the possibility of doing it like this, where we have, right, here we go. This is the base component and this is like the basic structures. So for example, the basic structures of this button for not including this is it has like a background. I would even say maybe it has a stroke. Let's make it the same color. Let's add these to have a stroke too. Okay, and then yeah, color, it has an icon, has text icon. Okay, so right, this is already one way to make it. This is to where you have the full like base component, where it's every like you have the most, I feel like, atomic pieces there that wouldn't change the meaning of what it means. I mean, this is a very neutral, I feel like, button or base component, and I will go into that a little bit more. So all right, actually I never really thought of this and I want to explore this. So we're gonna take this here and we're just gonna actually make this a component, and this is the base component, and we're gonna put this as button base button, meaning like I believe that with this underscore here, if you were to publish this to a library for other people to use, it would publish to the library. I hope that is correct. I hope that is correct information. Anyway, okay, so now we're going to take this and let's make like a primary button, right? Primary button. Let's make it this color. And then the rest of these colors in here would be, nope, that. Okay, so this is base button, right? And then I would make another main component, and then I would name this primary button. So this is just full on button, right? And so if we look at this, type is what I'm gonna call it. Okay, so now let's look up button here. Okay. So here we have an instance of the button component, right? And then you can change it to primary and secondary, tertiary and stuff. And then, for example, if you didn't need these icons, you would, you know, delete them. And then if you look in the layers, if you're looking at them, they're not really deleted, they're hidden. So this would be like your base button. So I would actually hide these. You know, I could delete these actually too, because this is a component within the base component. This is the base component, and in this component, right? So let's like name them. All right. Okay. Okay, so that's that. But then, you know, another thing to consider is that, let's say you have a primary and then this is not a type 4, but this is still a primary. And then this, right, so you could look at this and be like, all right, I need only a primary or secondary, and I need a hover, right? So I feel like in general, the configuration here is pretty straightforward. Like having a base here, I don't think would make the usability of this component like too complex. The big problem here though is when it comes to surfacing these icons, right? So someone when they click into it, like I want to change their primary and I want this to be like add new event or something in, like, let's say the piece I'm creating, and you want to have an icon here. So the way I would have to go if I was using this is, if you didn't have your layers open and all that stuff, right? I would click primary. You'd have to either click a lot into it to be like, oh, these are my icons here. Then I would add that, and then, you know, you can change it based on, you know, what icons you have in your library. But I feel like that requires a lot more like clicking and sub navigating into just trying to have an icon show up. Also, I feel like when you're editing or actually creating these components, if it was like a base component, like you'd have to have all these opened, and then you'd have to make sure like, oh, these are both white, these are both, okay, they gotta be both like black for this particular, or like this color, and then this one same here. Like you have to make sure that these icons will match the proper color or situation that this button is structured. And so it's like having to remember, like, oh, I actually have these pieces of this in the base component that I have to account for this component. So same here with like primary, secondary, tertiary, like when I have to like hover over them, like not when you hover over them, for these hover states. So I'd have to open this up and make sure like, oh, these colors are the same. Like, for example, so I think a better example would be here. For example, like if I open this, oops, I have to make sure that these icons are updated to a white because you can't see them. And I guess it's just kind of like, in a way, I'm starting to realize even like here, the maintainability, there's a lot of like hidden things, and it's harder to see like what is and isn't available. And then it also is extra work on the user or people using this, and to remember that like, oh, I have to remember to go into the instance, go into the layers and see what icons or what is available, versus let's actually create something not like this. Let's make a button component like this, and this is kind of the variant I think piece that Joey was making of, even though there's probably going to be a lot more stuff you see and stuff you have to look at and stuff you do, I think it surfaces a lot more. And when the person's using it, or when people add these components into their designs that they're working on, configuring them is just going to be a lot easier. So let's go back and call this primary button, right? And I'm going to take this out. Ooh. Detach instance. I'm going to ungroup this. I'm going to auto layout this. Oh, it's already auto layouted. What did I put? I put like 8, 8, 12, 12. Make this 8. Oh, to go back though, I think the biggest benefit of this is like, if you need to really make large sweeping changes, you could just do that with the base component. So like if I wanted to make everything round like this, I can do that and it will probably do that. In this next scenario that we're going to talk about, those changes may not be as efficient. And I think that is probably the biggest like con in this situation. So let's kind of go back, and I'm gonna take this out and I'm gonna take this out, give it a background. All right, let's make it 4. Okay, so that's a primary button. So here, instead of all being in like this big conglomeration of a group called button, again, that you would have groups that are more specific to almost like the function of it, or more specificity around it. So instead of just button, you'd have primary button or secondary button. And so here, when you have an instance of a button, you have primary button. And if you needed a secondary, instead of going in the side here, you know, with the different like attributes of this, a primary button can take, you would just switch it to secondary, right? And so, right, the benefit here is that as at least for the user, it's more configurable and easy to make those changes of like, okay, I want the default one. No, I need the hover one. Let's say you had other states of a button like pressed, active, things like that. And then if you wanted to, you can just configure right, left, or none for like the iconography, instead of having to go here, clicking into it and making sure like, oh, does this even have like icons? Right, if we go to this example, does this even have icons for me to use and configure? So yeah, I think this is actually a really interesting exploration of like, what are the benefits, pros and cons? And so this is gonna be harder to maintain, right? So what I mean by that is harder to maintain, or it's just gonna be, there's more work or required when you want to make changes. So as you saw, remember, like you can make changes to this very easily, like if you wanted to or needed to. I wonder if I can make, no, I can't make this. So structurally, if you needed to, you could make those sweeping changes if you had a base button. But for here, you'd have to, you know, select all of them, do that for primary button, and then you have to go into there and do that for secondary button. Now, Okay, for me to say that this is harder to do, sure. I think that in this particular situation, we've kept the scope pretty small. So that wasn't really that difficult. But let's say you're dealing with form elements. And I think form elements or form inputs are probably the best example of complexity the best example of complexity. So I'm not going to go into it because I don't want to, that's a whole another story for maybe a whole nother day. But yeah, so I think this was a good exploration between like, okay, so what is the difference between like working with variants versus working with variants but with a base component? And I think to sum it up, base components really allow you to make bigger sweeping changes, and it will affect how you essentially group your different elements. So when you have a base component, you have the flexibility, the ability to create groupings based on like the specific piece. So it's just button, and then primary, secondary, tertiary are just attributes of this button in this group. When you don't have a base component though, you start to have a lot more components and things you need to maintain and make sure that they are all aligned and they're all consistent. But what this does is, I think it does a better job of surfacing all the different states and like I guess forms that this component can take. And I think it also helps with just usability, right? For when you're using the instance and you have users using instances, so it's easier to change the state and whether or not you have like icons as a piece of the component, and people can, you know, decide on left, right, none, much easier through this experience of changing these attributes here versus having to guess and maintain and see like, okay, I'm in this button, but then I have to go to the base button, and then I have to toggle on and off here. So yeah, I mean, in some ways this is like subjective too, because it really just depends on like the workflow of your team and who you work with and what they're used to. And you know, that can definitely change. Maybe this is better, and maybe maintainability is more, or something that you require more or desire more in your design system. So this could be something that you go towards, versus here takes a lot of more maintainability and, you know, focused, what do you call it? Takes a lot more maintainability, and you have to just make sure that if you make one change here, you gotta make sure you address all the other different types of buttons as well, to make sure like the structures are still the same across all of those. So that was a long one, and something, I don't know, it's fun to explore these and like how you build them, and how you build them will impact like just usability and interaction and adoption, which are always huge important things for design systems. Let me know if anything stood out to you, or you know, you have a preference with how you like to approach building components and things like that. But other than that, this was much more casual, much more like me talking through what I'm looking at and going through. Maybe I'll do another coffee and components, or just, you know, casual designing. All right, thank y'all.